was buried in a German nunnery sometime between 997 and 1162. Anita Rodini and her colleagues studied her remains, looking at her teeth to learn about her diet and oral health, and they found traces of lapis lazuli used to make the blue pigment ultramarine. This pigment was so expensive in the Middle Ages that only master illuminators would use it. Its presence in this woman's teeth is the first direct archaeological evidence that women artists participated in the production of high-quality illuminated manuscripts, contrary to the previous belief that master illuminators were all men. Anita Rodini is an assistant professor at University College Dublin. She's an archaeological scientist who uses dental plaque to uncover past environments and working conditions.
When we put a little bit of dust under the microscope, we can see that the dust contains tiny particles of the environment in which it formed. Every time we breathe in or we eat things with a little bit of dust, we're actually eating and breathing a microscopic portion of the environment that we are experiencing during life. That environment is very specific to the way we live and what we do for a living. The fact that now we can study this dust from the dental tartar of ancient people is something that really motivates me and that I really found fascinating.
Lebanese anthropologist Fouad Khouri recalled being taught at university in the 1950s how to use calipers to measure the heads of his classmates and relate these measurements to ethnic ancestry. As he explained humorously, he became famous in his dorm as an expert on origins, using fingers rather than calipers to measure his classmates' heads and pronounce their supposed identities. This incident and others appear in Elise Burton's research and clearly show that even after 1945, ideas about racial classification continued to shape science and society in the Middle East and worldwide. Elise Burton is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. She's a historian of the life sciences in the modern Middle East. In her research, she tries to understand how new sciences like genetics and biomedicine were connected with the formation of racial, ethnic, and national identities.
I think studying the interactions and motivations of people in the past is particularly important in the history of science, because many of us might assume that science is simply the accumulation of facts that are just out there in the natural world waiting to be discovered. But in reality, science is a complex and contingent process. It involves people working within all kinds of intellectual, political, and economic constraints. So studying the history of science is a powerful way to understand how this process shapes and sometimes limits human knowledge, both in the past and in the present.
In 1959, the Soviet Union held a population census. The census claimed that the population of the Talish, an ethnic group indigenous to the Caucasus, had declined over the previous 20 years from nearly 90,000 to a mere 85 individuals. Many resisted their erasure by asserting that they were Talish to those who tried to deny it. They continued to teach their suppressed language, history, and traditions to their children and communities. 30 years after the census that tried to erase them, Talishes regained state recognition, but continue to face challenges. Krista Goff's research highlights the struggles minoritized communities like the Talish experienced during the Soviet era and the ways in which these dynamics continue today in states that still grapple with the legacy of Soviet-era politics and practices. Krista Goff is an associate professor at the University of Miami. Her research focuses on the creation of minorities and minority identities in the Soviet Union.
Some of the central questions that I ask in my work are who belonged in Soviet republics, who belonged in the Soviet or post-Soviet future, and who had the power to determine that belonging. My work is about what happened in the past, but it is also about the present. about the intersection of power and the work that historians do, about the ways in which state actors seek to suppress or erase certain histories, why some histories are underrepresented in the historical record, and why many want to keep it that way today. Being able to have critical, nuanced, and informed conversations, whether in the classroom or elsewhere, helps us understand not only the past, but also the world in which we live today and where we want to go in the future.
Peter Noyts arrived in Edo in 1627 to serve as a special ambassador of the Dutch East India Company to the Shogun of Japan. He was accompanied by an impressive entourage and was equipped with both opulent gifts and with a clear set of demands. Just 1 month later, his embassy rejected, he prepared to flee in the night. As he attempted to leave, his palanquin was halted by officials and his bearers abandoned him, leaving the ambassador sprawled alone in the street. Adam Klulo explains that this case is not atypical. When representatives of European enterprises like Peter Noyts tried to push into a world dominated by powerful Asian states, they often found themselves powerless, marooned on the edges of an international environment they could not dominate. Adam Klulo is a professor at the University of Texas, Austin. He studies European-Asian interactions in the early modern period and uses digital tools such as virtual reality and video games to study and teach about history.
I was born in South Africa, but I moved to Japan when I was 20 to enroll in university there. After living in Japan for a number of years, I've never really stopped moving, swapping cities and countries every few years. I'm fascinated by the stories of people caught between cultures, trying to navigate the first great age of globalization in the 17th century. This could be European ambassadors sent to meet with the shogun in the sprawling city of Edo, or a young Japanese mercenary who found himself at the center of an international conspiracy case, or a Balinese enslaved woman who won her freedom and reinvented herself as a wealthy Chinese entrepreneur in a Dutch colony. These stories are often hidden, buried deep in the archives, but finding them has been one of the most exciting parts of my career.
For centuries, rabbinic writings were subjected to censorship. Excerpts which were considered offensive to Christian sensibilities were erased or altered. Political, cultural, and religious transitions after World War II, such as Jewish-Christian rapprochement and the foundation of the State of Israel, released rabbinic communities from the fear of Christian enmity and allowed these previously censored texts to be recovered. However, as Karma Ben Yochanan's research shows, texts that were recovered because Christian authorities now exerted less anti-Jewish pressure were paradoxically often fiercely anti-Christian. This demonstrates that the process of reconciliation between Jews and Christians, rather than being straightforward, went in complex, even contradictory directions. Karma Ben Yochanan is a senior lecturer at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She works on religious tensions and dialogue in the context of Jewish-Christian relations.
An exciting aspect of my historiographic work is that it forces me to break the borders of my reserved academic surroundings and engage with people and intellectual traditions to which I wouldn't have access otherwise. When I first studied interfaith relations, I was acting as an unengaged, neutral historian who approaches her data like a biologist approaches the cell. But the religious agents who stood at the heart of my research opted for more mutuality, reflected back, criticized, and taught me that essentially neutrality is not an option. So I realized that a historian of dialogue cannot but participate in the experiment.